I never thought a quiet evening at home could turn into a moment I would never forget. My stepson called me earlier, saying he wanted to bring a few friends over, just to hang out. Normally, I would have said no, considering my husband was out of town and I valued some peace in the house. But something about the way he asked made it hard to refuse. I told myself it was harmless, just a few teenagers having fun, but a subtle thrill ran through me, a sense of anticipation I couldn't explain. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't entirely ready for the energy they brought in with them. 3 of his friends, loud and confident, each carrying that youthful charm that comes from feeling invincible. They laughed and joked in the hallway before stepping fully into the living room. I tried to act casual, offering drinks, small talk, making sure they felt welcome. But I couldn't help noticing how they looked at me, subtle glances that lingered longer than polite manners would suggest. It sent a shiver down my spine, a dangerous mix of excitement and guilt as they settled in. The conversation flowed naturally, but I felt an unspoken tension building in the room. My stepson seemed oblivious, busy showing them the gaming setup, but I caught brief moments of shared looks between them, silent acknowledgments of something I couldn't yet name. I found myself moving closer to the group under the guise of offering snacks, feeling the electricity in the air grow stronger. Each laugh, each touch on the shoulder, each brush of hands as I passed felt loaded with meaning. My heartbeat quickened, and I knew the boundary between innocent hospitality and temptation was narrowing dangerously. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that it was just my imagination running wild in the absence of my husband. Yet the way they leaned in to hear me, the subtle compliments that seemed directed at me more than the conversation, it was intoxicating. I felt a stirring inside, a curiosity I knew I shouldn't indulge, but couldn't resist exploring in small ways. The idea of saying no crossed my mind repeatedly, but with every passing minute, the thought seemed less plausible. There was a tension in the room, an unspoken game beginning that only I seemed aware of, and it thrilled me in ways I hadn't anticipated. As the evening wore on, the energy between us escalated in subtle ways. I started noticing their eyes following me when I moved around the room, the casual touches that lingered just a second too long. My stepson, oblivious, laughed and gestured toward me, proud of his friends, unaware of the undercurrent developing. I could feel my restraint weakening, my mind teetering on the edge of curiosity and desire. Each smile, each flirtatious gesture, built upon the last, forming a chain I couldn't yet break. I realized I was walking a dangerous line, a choice looming that I hadn't prepared myself to make. The tension was palpable, and I knew that one wrong move could change everything. The room felt smaller now, though it hadn't changed. Their presence filled every corner, the air thick with laughter and subtle tension. I found myself noticing details I hadn't before, the confident way one leaned against the couch, the way another's gaze lingered on me for just a moment longer than normal. My stepson busied himself with a game console, leaving me alone with their attention, and the shift was immediate. I felt their eyes tracking my movements, the quiet energy of curiosity and admiration between us growing stronger. It was intoxicating, dangerous, and yet impossible to ignore. I offered them more drinks, a simple gesture that somehow felt like an invitation. Each hand I passed over, each casual touch of fingers on theirs, carried a weight I wasn't prepared for. I caught myself adjusting my posture, leaning in slightly, feeling the subtle thrill of being noticed in ways I shouldn't allow. The conversations were light, teasing, but beneath them ran an undercurrent that made my pulse race. Every laugh, every shared glance seemed layered with meaning that only I could sense, and it awakened a part of me I had long kept subdued. As the evening continued, I noticed the stepson's friends moving closer, their casual proximity sending a thrill I couldn't ignore. One sat near me on the couch, shoulder brushing mine under the pretense of watching the game. Another leaned forward to grab a snack, his hand grazing mine in a fleeting touch that left me momentarily breathless. It was subtle, almost innocent, yet I couldn't deny the stirrings it caused. I reminded myself constantly to remain in control, but with each passing minute, the boundary I had set for myself seemed to blur, shifting in ways I wasn't ready to confront. They began to share stories, jokes, and memories, drawing me into their world with charm and humor. I laughed along, but my mind wandered to the thrill of attention, the excitement of being seen not just as a mother or a stepmother, but as someone desirable. I felt a strange exhilaration, a magnetic pull toward them that made my chest tighten with anticipation. I knew the stepson was nearby, yet his absence from our immediate circle made the tension easier to succumb to. The house, quiet moments before, was now alive with laughter, glances, and unspoken possibilities. I kept telling myself it was harmless, that I was merely enjoying their company, but the subtle flirtations were impossible to ignore. The brush of a hand, the teasing remark, the lingering eye contact, it all built into a crescendo of temptation I had no intention of admitting aloud. Each gesture seemed perfectly calculated to entice, yet I also wondered if I was projecting my own desires onto them. Despite my rational thoughts, my body betrayed me, reacting in ways that confused and excited me at the same time. By the time my stepson excused himself for a phone call, I realized the room had shifted. The innocent visit had transformed into something charged with tension I was no longer able to dismiss. The house felt unbearably quiet after he left, as if the air itself had been holding its breath while he was here and only exhaled when the door clicked shut. I stood in the same spot for several minutes, trying to understand the weight in my chest. It wasn't guilt alone. It wasn't desire alone. It was recognition of what I had allowed, what I had wanted, and what I could never pretend away again. I didn't regret the honesty between us, but I couldn't deny the consequences that came with it. My husband returned home later than usual that evening, tired and distracted the same way he always was. He asked about dinner without noticing the tension in my posture, or the distance in my expression. I watched him move around the kitchen, opening cabinets, checking emails, muttering about deadlines. It was strange how ordinary everything looked while my entire world had quietly shifted hours earlier. I found myself studying him the way someone might study an old photograph, searching for traces of what once felt familiar. I realized how much effort I had spent convincing myself that things would get better, that he would eventually notice the small ways I was fading. He never did. And now, after what had unfolded with Daniel, I couldn't pretend that emotional neglect was normal anymore. Days passed in a quiet blur. I avoided calling or texting Daniel, and he respected the distance, even though it made the silence between us feel like an unanswered question. My thoughts kept looping back to the moment our hands almost touched, the way his voice had softened when he said he cared. I wasn't trying to feed the feelings, I was trying to understand them, trying to understand myself. Eventually, the weight became too much to carry alone. One evening, while my husband sat scrolling through his phone, I told him we needed to talk. He looked up reluctantly, as if I had interrupted something important, though he wasn't doing anything meaningful. I spoke calmly, not accusingly, explaining how unseen I'd felt for years, how disconnected we had become, how I couldn't continue living in a marriage where I felt like a background detail. He grew defensive as expected. He said work had been stressful, that I was overthinking, that marriages go through phases. But even in his explanations there was no real emotion, no fear of losing me, no urgency to fix what was breaking. Just excuses layered over exhaustion. And that told me everything I needed to know. That I didn't mention Daniel. The emotional distance in my marriage existed long before that moment with him. What happened between us was a symptom, not the cause. I simply told my husband the truth. I needed change, whether that meant rebuilding from the ground up or walking away. He didn't give me an answer. Not that night, not the next. His silence was its own response. A few days later, I stepped outside for fresh air, trying to clear my thoughts. As if pulled by some quiet gravity, I found myself messaging Daniel, asking if we could meet, not to cross lines, but to talk openly one last time. He agreed without hesitation, but his reply carried restraint, as if he didn't want to assume anything when we met. He didn't reach for me or expect anything from me. He simply listened. I told him I needed to choose a path for myself, not for him, not for my husband. He nodded with an understanding that felt gentle rather than demanding. He said whatever direction I chose, he wanted it to be one where I didn't shrink to fit someone else's neglect. I thanked him. Not for his feelings, not for the tension between us, but for the simple fact that he saw me when I had forgotten how to see myself when we parted ways. There was no dramatic confession, no impulsive closeness. Just two people acknowledging a truth that changed them both. As I walked home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. The moment I caught him that evening wasn't a mistake. It was the moment that exposed the cracks I had ignored for too long. I didn't know exactly where my path would lead, but for the first time in years, I knew it would be a path I chose for myself. The footsteps grew louder, and I forced myself to straighten, taking a deep breath as my stepson stepped back into the room. I plastered a casual smile on my face, hiding the rapid pulse of my heart and the lingering warmth in my chest. His friends shifted slightly, subtly distancing themselves as if sensing my attempt to regain control. I served another round of drinks, keeping my hands steady while inside, my mind raced to process everything that had just happened. The thrill, the guilt, the temptation. All of it pressed on me, leaving a lingering tension I couldn't shake. My stepson chatted about his call, unaware of the undercurrent in the room. I laughed at his jokes, offering nods of agreement, all while feeling the eyes of his friends on me. Each glance, subtle and calculated, reminded me of the line I had crossed and the danger of discovery. I found myself reflecting on how quickly the evening had escalated, how innocent intentions had turned into something charged with forbidden energy. There was excitement in the secrecy, yet the weight of my choices pressed heavily on my conscience, a reminder that what I had done was reckless and irreversible. That I watched as his friends prepared to leave, their movements casual, but I sensed a quiet acknowledgement of what had occurred. I felt a mix of relief and lingering desire, the memory of their attention clinging to me like a shadow. My stepson, oblivious, waved them off, thanking them for coming over, and I forced a polite smile, hiding the complexity of emotions swirling inside me. Alone again, I sank into the couch, letting my thoughts drift, reflecting on the tension, the thrill, and the consequences I had invited into my life. Each heartbeat reminded me of the risk I had taken and the forbidden excitement I had succumbed to. Even after the door closed behind them, the energy lingered, leaving me restless and aware of my own desires in a way I hadn't been before. I replayed the subtle touches, the lingering glances, the moments where restraint had almost failed. There was a thrill in the secrecy, an addictive tension in knowing what I had experienced and what could have happened. At the same time, guilt gnawed at me, reminding me of the boundaries I had crossed, the moral line I had flirted with, and the potential consequences of my choices. I realized then that my life had changed in ways subtle yet undeniable. The evening had awakened something in me, a forbidden curiosity, a taste of excitement, and a reminder of vulnerability. I questioned my actions, wondered about the future, and yet a small part of me yearned for the thrill again. The tension between desire and guilt would linger, shaping my thoughts and choices in the days to come. I sat in silence, reflecting on what I should have said no to, and what I had instead allowed, knowing this night would leave an indelible mark on me, one that I could neither erase nor fully confess.